The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in a cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised.
Paranormal 5 is bringing you Para Peeps New England to help showcase some of the best in the paranormal and unexplained in the area. Their goal? To show the strength of paranormal unity by giving everyone in the field a voice. Join them as they discuss everything from haunted locations, aliens, metaphysical, cryptids, and much, much more. So sit back, enjoy the show, and as always, thank you for listening.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to episode 2, season 2 of Para Peeps New England. My name is Rich.
I'm Missy.
And we are of Paranormal 5, a Maine-based paranormal family. So, first off, as always, thank you in big part to everyone that came back this season. Our last episode was the first one of season number 2 with our guest, Luke Jackson of Maine Paranormal Society.
Woo, woo.
I know, right? Woo! So we're super happy to have him on, and thank you to guys who checked that out, gave us some feedback. We appreciate it as always. And tonight we are going to change it up a little bit. So tonight, my special guest and host is none other than Missy. We're going to talk to you a little bit ourselves tonight. We don't have another guest we're going to bring on, but we all knew this episode was going to happen because there is someone here that has a certain infatuation with a certain place. And that place would be Gettysburg. So tonight we were going to talk a little bit about some of the brief history of Gettysburg and the battle that ensued. We're going to talk a little bit about personal experiences, some of the well-known experiences, and just give you guys a little bit of the information into a place that we love so much, even though it's outside of New England. I know we're cheating a little bit here, but
I know we've got to branch out, though.
We do. This is the expansion series. That's what we're going with. So without further ado, what I'm going to do, Missy, is I would like you to tell these beautiful people a little bit about the history of Gettysburg, the history of the battle, and just kind of what led to it becoming what it is today.
Okay, well, I think I might be able to handle that.
I think so.
So, June 1863, the Union had just been beaten terribly in Chancellorsville, which was at the end of May, Virginia. And so the Union and the Confederates started to head north. The Confederates' intention was for a northern advancement, one for supplies. They were running very low on supplies. There was a lot of other battles and scrimmages from below Virginia, which I feel like doesn't get as much attention as it should.
Right.
So the Unions had pretty much cut off a lot of their lines of supplies. So they were heading north for, obviously, supplies, but also to kind of gain some more, they thought that they had this war in like the end in sight, and it was in their hands.
I mean, this is after a number of victories in the South over the Union, pushing the Union back as well. So.
Yeah, so definitely. So we had that. And so the Union obviously knew that this was going to be happening. So they kind of kept close to Baltimore, Washington, D.C., as they were making their way back north. And the Confederate kind of broke up into 3 kind of big groups. So they had groups heading towards Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is the capital of Pennsylvania. They had groups, another set of groups heading closer a little bit to Carlisle. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering it. And then they had some closer to York, Pennsylvania. So they kind of had their troops scattered throughout everywhere. Same thing with the Union. It's not like they were all marching together one as one, but so we all kind of knew that they were going to cross paths in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
June 28th, the Union had just gotten notice that General George Meade was going to be taking commanding of the Union Army. There had been a lot of
changeover.
There had been a lot of change of
a lot of politics involved.
Yes, a lot of politics involved, which is a whole other different story. And try not to kind of go through so many so many rabbit holes.
Sure.
But another thing that's to kind of put in consideration is that, the Union just had this big shakeup with getting a new general in charge of their army, but the Confederate had also just lost, their right-hand man, Robert E. Lee's right-hand man, which was Thomas Stonewall Jackson. He was injured in He was injured in Chancellorsville, and died from pneumonia shortly after,
fun fact too, actually shot by one of his own.
Yeah, shot by one of his own men for
mistaken identity.
It was at night, which is terribly sad. But anyways, both teams were kind of shooken at this point. A lot of things were kind of in the it could have been anyone's game at Gettysburg. It honestly could have been, because of there being so many changes and lack of food, malnourishment, and a lot of these troops were also extremely sick. Robert E. Lee, and just a random fun fact, he was fighting dysentery during the entire Battle of Gettysburg. So he was constantly he really wasn't there. He was using the restroom a lot, and on top of a lot of minor heart attacks. Oh God,
that was the sound from the restaurant.
And utmost respect for that, though. But he was having minor heart attacks throughout the whole war, but it was really talked about during this time. So June 30th. There was some troops from, I'm not going to get into details, but there were troops that came from the south, from the western part of town into Gettysburg, and from the eastern part, some cavalry, the Union cavalry had kind of come into play, and they had seen that they noticed that there were Confederate troops,
sure.
and they knew that this was.
They
honestly didn't know. They knew that they were going to cross paths at one point, but it wasn't this is where it's going to happen.
Sure.
And then literally July 1st opened up with General Buford from the Union cavalry, and he was completely outnumbered by the Confederate, but they held the ground that day on July 1st on over on McPherson Ridge, Seminary Ridge, over in that area. They held the ground for so long, and I think it's something the first day doesn't get as much attention because you maybe don't see the huge big names of people that were there that day, or the big locations and everything like that, but
that and just the size of the second and third day as well.
Yeah, exactly. I really do think that too.
Yeah.
So, pretty much the Union retreated back towards town into Gettysburg, over towards Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, on more of the area where they were coming in at. The Confederates were coming in again from the north and the west and the south, or the Union was coming in from the south and the east.
Mm-hmm.
And little did they know, but the Union had higher ground. So July 2nd, coming into battle, this is where you hear Little Round Top. This is where you hear the Peach Orchard. You hear Cemetery Hill in the second day, the Wheat Field, Devil's Den. This was kind of the big area. There was a lot of just death. I want to say probably the third day was terrible, but looking back, hearing the casualty rates and everything, that second day is just some of these Redland. I don't know. I'll openly admit that I don't know how the Corps, Regiment, Brigade, and how that all breaks down. But I do have to recommend a book. That's two books. It's they're both called So You Think You Know About Gettysburg, and it's talking about the monuments that are at the actual battle. And I've read both of them, and it's extremely interesting because they talk about like how many men were in certain corps, brigades, and
Sure.
regiments, and it talks about how many were casualties in the Battle of Gettysburg, and some of them were completely just wiped out, which is something it's
and if you think too, some of these
terrible.
smaller areas that were sent, I mean, you're talking
about towns,
towns of people, right?
Towns
I mean,
and
like
cities
the
of
men
men.
of most ages, just all leaving town, leaving the women and children behind, and then never returning. Like, that's just there's so many side stories that I feel like, especially from the paranormal side, that I mean, we'll get into a little later in this podcast, but that's just it's crazy to think of just entire towns of people wiped out in 1 day, 2 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so with July 3rd, the last and final day of the battle, you hear a lot about Culp's Hill again. Culp's Hill was kind of like a part of like all three of the days of the battle, which is kind of like an not really spoken about too much location of the battlefield. You also have East Cavalry, which is another kind of like little secret spot in Gettysburg. And then you also hear of course, Pickett's Charge, which was pretty much when all the Second and the First Corps of Virginia just walked across. It was over a mile walk.
Yeah.
To a little over a mile
open fields,
and they were
with the Union on the high ground on the other side.
Yeah, and they were it was slaughter. Yeah. Slaughter. So by day 4, which there's also like not talked about, but there were scrimmages still going on within the pullback, exactly, and the retreating of the South, leaving Gettysburg on July 4th. But at the end of the day, there was 51,000 casualties of dead, wounding, and missing for both sides, which is it's heartbreaking. I think Mark Nesbitt, which I will probably refer to Mark Nesbitt a few times in this podcast, talked about it. It was, I think in Yankee Stadium, you can fit 52,000.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
So it's just kind of like what you think about, like what you see like at a baseball field or a big like arena, like that's what was, that was the casualties. Like to kind of put it into perspective that way too. So yeah, that's just, like I said, like a very quick chopped history. I will spare you guys a little bit.
Sure, yeah, because again, there are so many different. I think what's cool, the more you dive into, set aside the paranormal side. I think that the more you look into this battle and the more individual battles that were taking place and the storylines, it's insane. I mean, I know a lot of people here may have, and I know we've seen it a million times, but like the movie Gettysburg, I mean, that covers a couple of major storylines, but then you get into some of these other films and documentaries, and it's just. There were so many individual plots going on as well, like, of heroic plots, of tragedy, of just all kinds of things. And it paints such a broader picture than, of what some perceive this battle to have been about. When you look at all the smaller battles that were taking place and smaller triumphs and tragedies that took place within the battle. So it's again, you could go on for days and days, but, definitely find whatever knowledge you can, anyone who's listening to check out more if you haven't. Because there's a lot to be learned. Obviously, not only about just our nation's history, but just about individualism and just triumph and tragedy. And there's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of very interesting stories that I know that there's probably stories like that from all different types of battle, even going back to the Revolutionary War and stuff like that about, hearing certain soldiers' stories and stuff like that. And it's just, it's they were people. Like, I think sometimes like, just because history, like over time, we forget names, and we just think like
events,
exactly. We don't remember the people, and hearing certain stories about individual people, maybe that they're people from your state, or I don't even know. It's just really mind blowing, and it's kind of just a good remembering.
So based off that knowledge, it sounds like you kind of like this place, like you kind of like Gettysburg
just a little bit.
So that's not something that just developed overnight. So why don't you talk a little bit, and I can share maybe some of my input afterwards, because obviously, you far before I ever even knew about, well, not knew about, but just had an interest in it. You've been very interested in Gettysburg for a long time for a lot of different reasons. So why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about what got you interested in Gettysburg, how it started, and where it led to, where you're at today and how you feel about it.
Okay. Well, so I guess going like way back to like Unsolved Mystery Days and watching Mark Nesbitt talk about on one of the episodes about, oh my God, you're gonna have so much fun playing with these buttons. So watching Unsolved Mysteries, and seeing Mark Nesbitt talk about the ghosts of Gettysburg and all of his like stories that he has gotten and collected from people that have had experiences, and he wrote 8 books. I think I might even be wrong with that, about called Ghosts of Gettysburg. He's written many other books.
Yeah.
So that kind of really just was just like, oh my God, that's so cool. And it being so close to family, we, when I was 7 years old, I think 7, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in that time frame, we actually took a day trip when we were visiting my grandfather, and we did the battlefield tour. We kind of played tourist, and I was just blown away. And just
what do you think it? So if you can think back to the first time you went down there, obviously you went down with an interest in the paranormal, but when you first get on the field and you first, like, what's the first thing that hits you?
I think it just sadness, like almost just like my heart just sunk. Like, and I don't know if it was.
Do you think that was from pre-learned knowledge, or just the? Because again, you're talking what, 7, 8 years old?
Yeah, I think 7, 8 years old.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe not even be able to understand why, but I wonder if that's more just, again, was that more of what you had learned about it, or just the overall energy, the atmosphere of what that place put off?
I think it was more because obviously I knew that there was a battle that had happened there, but to the extreme of it, like, come on, like I
Right.
7, 8 year old, like I don't even expect like our kids to understand,
exactly.
like when we go, like to understand like how major this actually was.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I honestly think like, yeah, I knew, but I almost just wondered. I almost just think like environmentally, like it just hits you.
Sure.
Like it just hits you, and it's just a strange feeling. And after going for over 25 years, I still get hit with that same feeling, and I'm just like, oh, like this just, I don't know how to describe it, but so
and again, not to derail it, but I think what's so cool about it is, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to having that place, that home away from home, that if you're going into a meditation, where do you put yourself? If just where you want to escape to when life is crazy. But this offers that in so many different ways. I mean, you could know nothing about the battle or the paranormal side of it, and just be blown away by the sheer beauty of the landscape.
Yes.
There's that. There's obviously, if you're a history buff and you want to dive into the Civil War, I mean, everything you need to know about that particular part of the battle.
Just the artwork and the monuments.
The artwork,
too.
The monuments. I mean, I don't want to butcher the statistic, but I believe it's like the most monuments within such a mile radius in the world.
Yes, I think it's in the Guinness Book World
Records.
World Records,
right? Of how many monuments per acreage or whatever it might be, but so there's that, and then of course for any of us paranormal seekers, I mean, you've got everything. So I mean, there's a lot of different ways that it kind of that can draw you. But which again, we'll get to more of that a little bit later in the convo. But
yeah.
So you're 7, you're 8 years old, you get down there for your first time, and then just kind of take us through.
Yeah,
after that.
I bought Mark Nesbitt's a tape of him telling all of these stories.
For you kids that are listening, a tape was something that you could actually.
It was before CDs, it was before digital, and then there's probably people and be like, "You guys think tapes are old? We got record players, we got 8 tracks, like whatever. We get those too." But so I got a tape of him telling some of the stories that he had written, that he had been collecting from people and their experiences, like I had said. And I said, I just was just drawn to it. So I needed to know more, like, it just kind of, bought books, and we continued to go. Like, day trips turned into a few days staying in location, like down there, being able to be there for more than just the day, a few days.
Sure.
And then, once I got a little bit older, my parents actually got connected with a paranormal investigator down there. So we went out, I think I was like 13, 14 years old, and we're out investigating the field. And like the rules, the national park rules back then are completely different than what they are now.
Sure.
They're a lot more stricter, which I understand because they're trying to preserve and protect these monuments. And the land.
Right.
So I completely understand that
I feel like we should
like
throw that out there a little bit. That to anybody who might be going down there, you're actually not allowed. I guess it's kind of a gray area, but investigating on the battlefield is kind of frowned upon.
Yes.
And we've heard stories that a cause might be because you're not allowed to do any type of relicking at all in the battlefield for anyone who doesn't going out metal detecting or taking the ground. So when you're walking around with these different tools, these different it might come off as potentially looking to do some relicking. I don't know that it's also
they
some
also
people
just
look at
don't
it
put
from
up with any bull crap.
They don't put up with
really
bull crap. The National Park Forestry member, they're not really supposed to get into that side of it. They're supposed to keep it on a historical basis.
You may be lucky and find a park ranger that will talk to you about
Sure.
paranormal experiences, but it is very, very few and far in between that somebody would be willing and able to talk to you.
Now, that doesn't mean that there's not groups. You can do it the legal way, of course, but as far as just getting out there with your cameras and your K2s, you just want to make sure you're not doing anything you shouldn't be.
Yeah, definitely. Because actually, we had friends that got in trouble with the K2, and stuff like that. So, when I've heard that story happen many times before, so it's just best just to kind of play it safe and just park hours, and just we just do a voice recorder and pretty much when we're out there within the park hours. So, but anyways, so back 13, 14 years old, investigating on the battlefield, staying at Sachs Bridge super late, which you were able to do back then. And just doing that, and just it continued to grow, and just visiting as often as I was able to as a child, teenager, and then now as a mother, bringing our kids and actually being able to bring you. So I brought you, Richie, and our daughter, our oldest, when she was 6 months old. Yeah. And she's been going there ever since, and I think all of our kids have gone when they were babies because it was a yearly trip. You know?
It really is, and that kind of ties into where I pick up as far as I unfortunately as a youth, younger, I didn't I never did any kind of traveling, and certainly Gettysburg wasn't on my thought list of things to explore. So in meeting you and meeting Missy. And having gone down there again, we had gone down with a trip with Dylan, when she was just a little baby, and I just so up until that point, like my home away from home was always up in the White Mountains. Like that's where I always went as a kid. We went out, we stayed, we camped, we hit the falls, we tubed the river, so that was always that place that was so close to my heart. And so I had gotten a chance to kind of bring Missy up there, and we had gone to check that out, and it was kind of like on her to be like, well, hey, let's go. Here's where I'm in love with, and it's clearly taken over just for both of us. Because again, my first experience of going down there is just, you're overwhelmed. Because what's really cool about it is that they do a great job, a perfect job, in fact, of trying to replicate what the fields would have been during the battle. So as far as controlling the overgrowth and just keeping it as historically visual as possible. So it's just, you're blown away by the visual of it. I think, one of our first stops was up on top of Little Round Top, and just looking down over the field. And then, so there's the scenic view. And as someone myself who just, I enjoy taking photos, like there's that side of it, just the visual beauty of the place, and then you sit back and you kind of close your eyes and you start to envision what it would have looked like crawling in soldiers and what the battles, and then you try to imagine what it would have sounded like. I mean, just the muskets, the cannons, the screaming, the orders, the everything going off at once. And so that's just so overwhelming. And then you see all these monuments, which capture moments. And again, what's really cool is they try to tie the monuments as close as they can based off of the knowledge they have of where the events took place. So certain, individuals, certain brigades, certain corps, like they try to keep everything as, historically correct as possible. So there's that, but then there's also the natural monuments. Like, you look at a place like Devil's Den, and you look at these rocks, these rock formations that were there during the battle, and you know that they took ricochets of bullets, and there was people that lost their lives, took their last breath on these rocks. Grown men that were probably reverted to childhood in their last moments of just wanting to be whatever, and it's just all that energy captured there. It's breathtaking, and that's just from that first visual appearance, and it just kind of hits you all at once, and you have to like process it. Like, you can't just, for anyone going down, I wouldn't recommend just going for like a day, because I don't think you can process what happened in that day. Like, you need multiple days to really experience
You really do,
it.
yeah.
So for me, there was that. Obviously, as well as the paranormal side. The first couple trips down there, for me, it was really just spending time in the different places in the battlefields. Here more recently, we've got to explore some of the other areas, other storylines, which we'll talk about a little later. So it's very capturing, and it's clearly become, my number 1/1A as far as getaway places, because it has everything you're looking for on so many different levels in one spot. It's amazing.
It
Oh,
is.
so thank you.
You're
Of course. All right, so that, again, just kind of a brief, what got interested. We'll talk about some of our more personal experiences a little bit later, but I just want you to kind of touch on some of the known experiences. So I guess these are more of your kind of big bucket commercialized stories that that people that are looking to maybe learn a little bit for the first time, what are they going to come across?
Okay, so some of like the very well-known stories of the Battle of Gettysburg, or just paranormal stories. Yes, paranormal stories. I know, because this is technically like a paranormal podcast. We should probably stop boring people with our. Well,
but I
we
mean,
love
come
Gettysburg,
on, but there's not a single person listening that won't fully acknowledge the connection between history and the paranormal. So you can't have one without the other. But yes, I guess you can. You can have newer haunts, of course, but
there's still history, technically.
Yeah, technically, yeah, it is.
So,
but yeah.
Anyway. So some of like the big like claims, haunts, down there. One story that I feel like is probably one of the most famous stories, and probably one of my most favorite, would probably have to be at Gettysburg College, which is kind of like a poo-poo. You can't go in there. Obviously, you got to be a student and all this other stuff. But it was in Old Dorm, which is a building for administration office, and the building was there during the time of the battle.
Yep.
I think it was Pennsylvania College at the time during the Battle of Gettysburg, but it was used, like many of the buildings that were there, as a hospital. So as time goes by, like I said, now it's an admissions office for the Gettysburg College. So one night, some administration workers, 2 women were working later at night, went to leave, hit the button for the elevator to go down to the first floor to leave. So they hit the button, the elevator keeps going all the way. It doesn't stop at the first floor, and it goes all the way down to the basement. They're both kind of just like, what the heck, try to hit the button, just like, oh, it must be acting up again. And so the doors open to a battlefield hospital scene of, the orderlies, the doctors, the surgeons, the men soldiers, that are like groaning and moaning in pain, that are dying. You see the limbs, it just brutal. And so the women are just like panicking, like, oh my God, like what is going on? They're frantically hitting the buttons, nothing's working. It's literally like time has like stopped.
Right. And just to reiterate, these aren't like, as the story goes, these aren't just two, not to sound negative, these aren't two, college kids, leaving a dorm party. These are administrative workers. Mm-hmm. Like these are, they're not just looking for.
Yeah. But it gets better. It gets better. So anyway, so this happens. Apparently one of the surgeons looked up from doing the surgery and kind of beckoned them to come in and to help. And as this was happening, the elevator's doors closed, went up to the first floor. They left. They were able to leave, and they went and got college campus. College campus security, came with them back to the place, down to the basement, and everything was normal. So It wasn't like anybody was trying to play a trick or anything like how would have this been able to happen. And so this happened, like I want to say probably sometime in like the mid 80s, just based on Mark Nesbitt's book and when it came out and when he had written his first book, because it's in this first book. Um, so for so many years, like he was looking for somebody that had had this experience happen to them, looking for like somebody else that it had happened again.
Sure,
To exactly to kind of exactly not that he didn't misbelieve these women that had this experience, but almost just like, has this happened before? And lo and behold, I don't know when, but he had been able to meet two more people that had worked in the building,
Wow.
that were working in the building and had that same experience. Kind of like I said, I would love to get into Old Dorm. Like I said, it's a beautiful, the three buildings that were there during the Battle of Gettysburg, and they're still there today. Like I said, they're beautiful, beautiful buildings. A couple other really big, well-known stories, is a Phantom Regiment. Kind of pops up all over the field. Like I've heard of it over, it was a Confederate, over by Pickett's Charge, where the Virginia Monument of Robert E. Lee is over on that side on West Confederate Ave. There's been sightings of a regiment just doing what they would do. Like
most noted, there was like a group out there, right? That was like
yes, it was actually
something.
So that's another thing. So then there's also been Union regiment.
Yep.
So it's been both Confederate and Union sightings that have been seen. Actually, I think it was that Brad Kinsley from the Ghost Lab. I remember like he actually got video footage of it at one point. I don't want to chop the story or anything like that, but he had claimed it was, and that was a Union regiment, or Union unit doing that. So I don't know. So there's been a lot of that. There's also been a woman of white that's been seen over on East Cemetery Hill, wandering around there. Also Spangler Spring. There's also another woman in white that has been seen in that area, and it's kind of there's a lot of mixed stories about it, like where she came from, her legend. A lot of people believe that it was a woman, her husband had died and she came to recover the body and she never stopped looking for the body. Sure. Another one is that a woman had taken her life before the battle. So I don't know, but there was actually even a ghost story, like with talking, like ghost stories claiming, like even while soldiers were in battle, on the way to battle too. Yes, the Fourth Corps, the Union, were apparently lost or got turned around somewhere, and they claimed that some man on a horse with a trifold hat marched them into battle, and they believed that it was George Washington.
Well, which it makes. I mean, again, if some of your thoughts on the paranormal are that in order to have an experience, you need to something needs to draw energy. I mean, look at the amount of energy being put during that time. So, I mean, if you've got the potential of already having some activity, and then you just supercharged it. With what's going on there.
No, and other big claims there is hearing the rebel yell, like that infamous, people have claimed that it is probably the most scariest noise that they've ever heard, is hearing like a rebel yell. And even like reading claims from Union soldiers talking about how petrifying hearing that yell was to them, and like what that meant to them, like reading just it's how it shook them to their cores, and they knew like battle was on, and like what they were up against with the Confederate soldiers. And other things is cannonball gunfire, strange mists. There's just a lot of different claims, stories, and
I think one of the things you hear in a lot of these stories too, which I think is really cool. So even going back to the two administrative workers down in the basement, and the individuals seeing entire groups or regiments of troops, is just the amount of energy that it must take. I mean, it's one thing to see an apparition, but when you're seeing an entire scene recreated, like it just lends to what's there. And just that, again, I know it's such an overly used word, energy, but it's just that it's just electric when you're there. And that's one of the things that I think.
Boogie woogie.
Yeah,
Sorry, I had to.
see, you gotta hit the button on that. Come on, we gotta get it. There's such a static charge when you're there at all times. And again, and that's why I think, like, even if you're not into the paranormal, like, you can't help but go down there and feel, the hair on your arm stand up and goosebumps. And it's such a charge, an emotional charge. Like, we've been there at different times, and you talked about, your first time being there, feeling that overwhelming sadness. We've also gone down there and talked about feeling an overwhelming amount of peace
Being at
and
peace.
tranquility, and just having complete just let it all go, and there's those moments there, and so it's again, maybe that varies from person to person, but this place just has the ability to completely take you over in one way or the other. God, it's awesome. It really is.
Yes.
So can you think of it? Is there anything else you want to touch on as far as known? I mean, I know we could get into, like, there's obviously the Wade story. There's
also I could definitely do the Jenny Wade story, I guess,
Sure.
which was, she was the only civilian that was killed during the Battle of Gettysburg. She was killed on the third day, right? I think the third day of that.
So.
Yes, I think she was killed on the third day, the early morning of the third day. I feel like I'm messing this up, and it was the second day.
Well, she was baking for the.
Yeah, or she was in the kitchen making bread. She wasn't at her house. She was at her sister George's house, who had just given birth a few days before the battle happened. And Jenny was back at her house when the battle kind of let go and started happening, and she fled towards the southern part of town, which was her sister's house. So she was there with her mother, her brother, the neighbor boy, her sister, and her sister's newborn baby. So she was out in the kitchen making bread over the little bread maker, which is so amazing. I don't even know how to describe, like, what it looks like. It's like a barrel that stands up, but it's almost like stands like at an X. It's very interesting. And as she was kneeling over, she had put the kitchen door behind her, or the door to the bedroom door behind her
had
to
the front
block.
door, and then you had, she was, she was in the kitchen, and then the door that went out into the bedroom, that door was open.
Because she thought that it was going to protect her, because there were stray bullets going and everything like that throughout the day or that morning. And she was pierced right in the back, and she was bent over, and it killed her instantly.
And it's crazy too, just real quick to add in. So if you go, if you hop on over to our Facebook page, I believe I've put up a photo, because we've been to the Jenny Wade house, which is named after her, even though it wasn't her house. And you can, the bullet holes, obviously, the house is still original. So you've got the bullet holes, and you can actually, I took a picture from where Jenny Wade would have been standing. And I had the doors lined up, and you can actually see the picture goes through both bullet holes, both the outside door and then that interior door. So you're actually in that same line. So that kind of gives a little bit more of a
and they actually still have, like, the bread. The thing where she was making the bread. It was like a bucket. Like I said, it's a very interesting piece. And they still have that. They actually have the bed frame where her sister was laying.
With a bullet
in the headboard where her sister was laying after just giving birth to a baby. So when Confederate soldiers had heard what was going on inside, they came in and helped to bring Jenny's body up through the stairs.
Confederate soldiers or
Union soldiers? Union soldiers. Helped carry Jenny's body and get everybody else that was inside to the outside or down around the house, which was kind of like an
which was also made very easy because there was a mortar shell or a cannon shell that had come through the house as well and blown out the interior wall that separated the two. Kind of, I guess you would look at it like today, like a duplex.
Yeah, it was a duplex of a house. And so really interesting in the house. So they brought it downstairs to the basement. You're able to do, like, doing the tour of the house is kind of like the same way that they brought her body downstairs. So it's a very strange building. Like, it's got a lot of different vibes. I do not believe, and I feel like many people have also said that Jenny is definitely not the person that is there residing and haunting this location. I didn't really feel her type of energy. It's her father, yes.
Because the father had left, just not to go too deep, but he had left for...
He was in jail, actually, in Eastern State Penitentiary.
Oh, that's right, in Eastern Penn. That's right. And so obviously hearing word of what was going on, I think he was trying to get, or I think it was just the grief of not being there during all this happening, and then him kind of coming back and mourning over that situation, and some of some of the different shows and stuff that you see where groups have gone in, and they definitely get that feel more of the grieving father as opposed to Jenny herself being involved.
It's definitely heavy. Upstairs definitely is a lot more interesting, a lot more, more of those like there's something here with us, like you're not alone, versus like downstairs and even in the basement. The basement just has its own creepy vibe because it's kind of like they have it set up like looking like Jenny's underneath the blankets over there, which she's obviously not. But it's really fun fact is that Jenny Wade is the second woman in history to be able to have a constant flying American flag at her gravestone. Or at where she's laid to rest.
The first woman was the woman that
Betty
made the
Ross,
flag, right?
yes.
She designed the original
the
flag.
Betty Ross.
And real quick, just and we'll move on, but just I think what makes it important too about the thought of it, because okay, so why this is such a big event? It was just a civilian, like obviously being the only civilian. But you got to think, Gettysburg prior to this battle
was like a town of like
2,000 people, I think.
1,000, 1,500.
Maybe
It wasn't a very
such a small
large
town.
Yes.
And then think of just the casualties alone.
And so think of dumped on it.
Yeah, so I mean, you have 52,000 casualties. Well, dead, wounded, or missing. 51, excuse me. But then there was plenty that didn't. So just imagine like your small town of less than 2,000 people is now all of a sudden host to 80,000 people, 100,000.
Something that people really don't realize also is that like yes, after like the battle, like the soldiers that were able to leave, they left with their companies, and then you also had Camp Letterman, which is over on the other side of Gettysburg, which is like closer to like East Cavalry, like that battle or that battle during the Gettysburg. But Camp Letterman was the hospital, and that was up and running until September. Everybody kind of had to get shipped out of there because they were getting ready to do the Gettysburg Address, which really wasn't supposed to be like a big thing with like Abraham Lincoln, which is like another side like rabbit hole that I could probably dive into, but I won't.
Sure.
But they had to get that up and cleaned up because they had this event that they wanted to do. The townspeople wanted to make Gettysburg a national cemetery for these soldiers because they didn't have any place to put them. And one thing that was like kind of like a big thing post the battle is that you had townspeople that were walking around with like handkerchiefs with peppermint oil because of the bodies not being buried correctly and not deep enough. There are a few maps still that you can find where people like where they marked where people were buried or where there were mass graves, and seeing it because the Confederates, they were just buried where they fell, pretty much in a big mass grave. They were buried where they fell. They would mark it on a map. And the Southern Women's Society, they didn't come back to Gettysburg to claim these men for, I want to say it was sometime in like the 1870s is when they came and brought these soldiers back, or what they could bring back.
Right.
But there's stories of talking about how men were just shoving men in between dead soldiers in between rocks at the battle at Devil's Den, and just pushing them down in between the rocks and just leaving them there. Gettysburg was literally turned upside down for a good few years, even after the battle. But then they kind of got so many visitors and people coming. Just not even few years. Like you had soldiers that would come and give tours of the battlefield and talk to people. It turned into a tourist town very shortly after the battle. And that's what it still is obviously today. And that's where they thrived and where they've been able to get their economy back up and booming and make it the amazing place that it is today.
So what do you think? I mean, I know obviously we touched a lot about it, just in talking so far. Like, in your opinion, what, from a paranormal standpoint, what makes Gettysburg such an active location?
I feel like this could probably like multiple different answers for this. Like, obviously, I think it's the tragedy that had happened. Like, it was so quick and it happened so, like, it just happened so fast and suddenly. And, like, so many emotions went into this battle. Like,
Sure.
even if the men had survived the battle, there were so many emotions that were left and imprinted in that land. And just the expectations, like the eyes of America, and even the world, technically, really, like when you
Sure.
think about like,
Oh, it had major
like
implements everywhere.
England was very looking very much on this because they were rooting for the South. Like,
Right.
there was a lot of eyes looking at this and hearing that they were getting this. Confederates were coming to the North. Like, this really could have. It really was the turning point of the war, even though it lasted another 2 years. Um, but I think it was just because of all the emotions that were into it. I also just think that it's also just the land, like it's got the rocks, like at Devil's Den, like it's just
the water. It's got the
water. It's got just, I don't know. I think a lot of it is that, but it also there's people constantly going there and grieving.
I think
that are grieving for these men, that are grieving for the lives that were lost, grieving for the people that, once again, like even if they didn't fight in that, the people that fought in the war, like that didn't even survive the war, like, oh my God, like you had to deal with these circumstances, the lack of food, the lack of proper clothing, especially for the South, like this was like, you sit in there like rag, like these men, the South was tough. They were extremely tough, and
just look at some of like the no shoes. He's just marching in a battle.
Some of them, yes, and that's like one thing that I do have to say is that people are just like, oh, they came to Gettysburg because of shoes. No, not really. Like it literally is a crossroad town to get to where they were going to and where they wanted men to go to. There's been a lot of debate about like why Gettysburg.
Well, it was like a nice shoes. It was a central hub that you could then have access into
like,
a lot of
if you
directions.
look at a map of Gettysburg and you can see where these roads are going and where they're leading you to. So it just, I honestly just think it's just because people are constantly going and grieving and giving thanks to these men that sacrifice their lives to make things better for what they thought would be better.
No, I agree, and we've talked about that with other locations too, where you've got these locations where the Jenny Wade house or the Lizzie Borden house or these places where you're trying to go and talk to one individual, but everyone is bringing so much with them that you've now just made all these deposits, these energy deposits within this location.
I don't even think Gettysburg is necessarily all paranormal. Like
no,
have people.
I don't think so either. I think there's just I look at Gettysburg the way sometimes I look at supposed it's a weird connection, like haunted objects where I don't necessarily think that it's spirit trapped inside. I just think that there's so much stuff residually on repeat there. There's so much just that sudden loss, that sudden stoppage, and then just again, what was the emotion that was poured into it during the battle, after the battle, since the battle, the people that have gone back and that are keeping the stories alive. It's just it's too much. And again, the fact that you've got you've got witness trees down there. You've got buildings that you walk around town, you see these brass plaques on all these buildings that were there during the battle. So you've got things you can look at and touch and feel that were a part of the battle. You've got, again, I go back to Devil's Den, the rocks. You can go and lay on the same rock that countless amounts of soldiers died on, or used as shelter, or used as as something to hide behind while they were reloading their muskets. I mean, you're so is even though we're 200 something years or 100 something years removed, you can go and be there almost like it was then. And again, you got you see the cannons, you see the fences, and
they do a beautiful job of maintaining it and keeping it as beautiful as it is. Like they do,
and I do think that again, because again, we get so focused on the battle activity as far as from the paranormal, but there was other things that took place too. I mean, it was like any place else. It's a town. It's an old town. So there's could have been just stories in that sense, but I do feel like you get that big sense of the residual activity there. As far as seeing soldiers, which we'll wrap up talking about some of our experiences, but just soldiers that are still working, that are still in play, that are still taking care of their responsibilities because they didn't have time to process what happened. They were in this battle and then they were gone and then they weren't. So I think there's just a lot of that residual energy left behind too, as far as what makes it and keeps it so active. So going from that, I would like to talk about some of the things that we've been fortunate enough. I mean, again, you've been down there multiple times, many times. I've been down a handful of times. And we've been fortunate enough to go on some investigations, both some of the buildings, doing some stuff on the fields. So talk about some of the experiences that we've had down
So my first experience down in Gettysburg was when me and my mom went out. We were over in the wheat field area, and it was during the anniversary of the battle.
there. Yep.
I don't remember if it was the first, second, or third night that we were out, but we were out driving in that area, and we were there. Like I said, the park rules were different back then, and so we were driving some ungodly hour. And it was July. It's hot. It's miserable down there. It's like it's hot as hell.
Hot in the summer.
Um, so
Which, I mean, again, I don't want to go back another rabbit hole, but just picture again, here you are with thousands of casualties around you on probably a 98-degree day. These soldiers are dressed in wool clothing.
the Union
The
definitely.
Union is
The
dressed in,
Confederate was
yeah,
kind of iffy, and then like a 10-pound bag
yeah,
on top
it's
of
just
your like 10-pound musket, your ammunition. But anyways, and lack of water because water was scarce,
Right.
and top of like having dysentery and other types of sickness and
Yeah.
diseases that you were probably sick with, but you still had to fight. But anyways, um, so we were driving that part of the field, driving up, and then in the middle of the road, there was just this thick white, and I mean like in the middle, not like on the sides of the road, like coming up, like over the grass. It was smack dab in the middle of the road was this thick, dense fog. And as we were driving up to it, like, my mom had our high beams on, and she's like, what is that? And then as we got closer, it literally just disappeared. Like it didn't go off to one side or the other. It literally was just gone. Another experience is that we've experienced down there is that cold spots. Feeling cold spots on really hot days down there is absolutely amazing. It's like a free air condition.
Thank you.
Thanks, don't go. I still want to talk to you.
Yeah.
Like,
We don't have to talk. Let's just hang out.
and also just the smell of tobacco. One time I had mentioned earlier that I was able to investigate with an investigator who's or I'm not sure anymore, but actively investigated down there quite a few times, and actually brought her psychic medium mother-in-law, and her mother-in-law kept on talking about tobacco.
Yeah.
And so she unrolled a cigarette and put it on top of one of the monuments, which is a big no-no. You shouldn't do that. But anyways, like, moving on. We came back, and this was over in Spangler Spring area, walking up to Culp's Hill, that area. We had come back, and we were the only people there. Like, when we left to go walking, we were the only people there. When we got back, we were still, and there was only like one way out from this area, so we would have seen a car.
Sure.
But the tobacco was gone off of the monument, which I don't know, take it as you are, but it was very interesting. So, and then another experience is when we went down back in 2019, one time that we were able to bring the kids investigating. It was one of Richie's like really big times, being able to be there and spend a good amount of time there, just not like the couple hour day trip and stuff like that. We actually saw a full body apparition while we were at Devil's Den. Me and the kids kind of took off from Richie and ditched him, and we were walking up because we had parked closer to the triangle field, like you're heading towards the wheat field on that side, and we walked down Devil's Den, and so we were getting slowly just kind of making our way back to the car because it was kind of getting closer to the park hours closing. And me and the kids ran into a couple, and they're just like, "Oh, are you guys here looking for ghosts?" And we're just like, funny thing. Yes, actually we are. And they're just like, "Well, you need to look across the field." And across the field is a slaughter pen. Obviously given the name for what happened there. And we saw this kind of bluish, glowish, greenish light figure that would walk so far, kind of do some type of maneuver, and then it would walk back. And it did it a few times, and then it disappeared. And then so Richie finally kind of catches up with us after having his own experience of kind of getting dirt dropped on top
Yep.
of his head when there was nothing that dropped on top of his head and no
Just
one
the
above
sensation
him.
of right.
And so he was trying to explain to me what had just happened, and I just like point over to the field, and he's
Gotta
seeing
one up
this.
me.
I know I one upped him, of course. I always have to. And we're just seeing this, and I say this all the time when I tell the story, and I'm just like, it was so hard because I didn't know where to look. I didn't know if I needed to look at the kids because like this is their first big paranormal moment. Like
Yeah.
you can't top like seeing a full body apparition.
Oh, not at all.
And so talking to this couple, they're just like, yeah, you know, like it's been doing this for a while. We went over there and it wasn't there when they went over there. They couldn't explain it.
Yeah.
They had seen it at different angles and they didn't know what it was, but it had been constantly, it's been doing it for a while. And it would disappear. And like I said, they went over there and there was nothing over there.
And another thing that was cool too
and they
was
came
that
back and it was still doing it.
so we had been there for a while. You know, we had been down in the field there for, you know, a couple hours probably or whatever it was. And so I had been going around taking pictures, you know, when it was still daytime out, you know, just to snap photos. Again, I was up on the rocks in Devil's Den, up on the upper, you know, the higher grounds. And then looking down at the slaughter pen, like Missy had talked about. So I had gotten a bunch of photos. Well, later that night, after having the experience with, you know, myself, Missy, the kids, and this other couple that was there telling us about it, seeing everything firsthand, you know, we you know, we're just, you know, high is just incredible at this point. I don't even know how to fathom it, but we get back to the hotel that night, and I'm just looking through pictures, and sure enough, we had actually captured the same thing in photos from earlier that day when it was still a little bit light
so
out.
it kind of validates the couple's claim, saying like how they had been like, you know, investigating, trying to figure out, like almost they were trying to debunk it, like, and not just necessarily going to it's like, yeah, it's definitely like a ghost, like it's something over there. So I thought that was extremely interesting, and like, you know, take it as it is. Like, you know, I'm very questionable. I don't always believe photos, but I just think it's amazing that.
Well, it's a photo that was seen. You know, yes, I agree, but the fact that we were all able to experience it firsthand, visually, and then to back it up with a photo, I think that helped it out a lot.
You know, it was a very interesting experience.
There was that, and then, you know, one other. I mean, we've had a couple other ones since, but you know, just to kind of wrap up here, another one, you know, probably one of my favorites, and most recent, of course, was that you know, we were not too long ago, I think back in April this year, 2021.
Yeah, 2021.
We were able to go down, and we had booked an investigation with the orphanage. And just a real quick story: the orphanage was there after the battle.
Part of the
building was there prior to, but the orphanage came about when they had found a ambrotype, which are these little, you know, bifold picture frames that the soldiers would carry. And there was a soldier that was found holding onto one.
Amos something, I forget his last name.
He was found clenching one of his children, and so, like, in memory of that, you know, you had the orphanage, you know, for the, you know, of the children of Gettysburg, you know, that had lost their parents and their fathers. And so you know, there's a lot of claims that take place there, but there's a lot of child claims that take care because of it being an orphanage. I think it served as a school at one point too, didn't it? Didn't it serve as like a schoolhouse?
I don't remember, but obviously it was an orphanage.
It was an orphanage. They're probably all in one.
But we're learning there.
So our idea was, you know, we were down there as a family. You know, what better kind of way to go and explore a child spirit rather than having children with you. And you know, for those of you that don't know, our kids. You know, they're into all of this as well, and they enjoy going out. 6, 8, and 10. They love going out. They love doing EVP sessions. They love using the K2s. So we brought them in, and it was really cool because, you know, we met with a tour guide. She was super nice. She kind of was just like, you know, whatever you guys want to do, just, you know, I'm just here with you. Let's go and enjoy the night. And so we opened the door. It's 2 doors. You walk in, and there's a long hallway. So we walk in the door, and then once we all enter into the hallway, the door to go into the orphanage swings open. And I just remember, like, we looked down at the kids and they kind of looked up like, oh crap, like we're about to go in here. Like it was just like, come on in. Like it invited us into the building. So we went in, and you know, long story short, like we had a great night. We had, you know, we were able to, the kids, you know, we started out traditionally kind of doing an investigation. And then as the night went on and the kids just kind of more so got to be kids again, that's when it really seemed to bring out,
AKA they started fighting and bickering.
Yeah. So
But it was made like our kids brought like pickup sticks. They brought jacks to kind of play games with the kids. I don't know necessarily like when those games came out, but it was the effort that they put into is that this is what they wanted to bring to the investigation and do.
Yeah.
And so they were playing games, and while we were playing jacks, it was my turn with the ball, and I can't play that game for crap. And so my ball rolled off, and so the ball rolls off. Um, in one direction. And so Dylan, our daughter, she asked and she's like, "Oh, do you mind rolling the ball back to me?" And sure as shit, what do you think happened? The ball rolled right back to her. Not like it was on path. Like the ball went off in one direction, like behind me. And Dylan, yeah, she was next to me, but it literally just.
And mind you, in the basement too, we're surrounded by like church pews. So you've got all these wooden legs on the ground, plenty of things objecting the way of the path of the ball. And again, it just finds its way like directly back to her, which was just mind blowing in of itself. And we had a lot of hits with the K2s.
The cat
We had
balls,
a lot of the cat balls
REM
going
ball,
off,
the REM pod. It's an amazing location, and the
was.
kids want to play and they love to talk. And we almost just kind of wanted to give them like a play date. That's kind of how we like. We first didn't go in like that, but almost just like never mind. Like we know what kids want to do. They just want to hang out. They're curious. They're probably really intimidated by us, but it was an amazing. That's probably like my favorite place my newest favorite place to investigate there is definitely there for sure.
So again, we just wanted to share a little bit of which we're going to try to do a little bit throughout this season, just some of our experience that we've had, and obviously Gettysburg's been a huge part of just everything that we've been involved in with paranormal.
I tell people it's my go-to. Like I probably got like an experience or a story that I can share.
Yeah, anytime, any place. So.
Anytime, any place. You want to know, I got you back.
So I think that'll wrap up for us guys tonight. Again, we thank you for hanging out with us, and we will see you again in 2 weeks with a new episode of Parapeeps New England. And as always, guys, thanks for listening and hanging out with us, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks, guys.